Hi, and welcome along to our AFTV News Daily special, where we're going to be taking a close look at some of the French players that Arsenal have been linked with. And to help me do that, I've brought in an expert with me today, bringing in Adam White. Adam, of course, who works and writes for Get French Football News. Adam's been on the show many times before. He's done shows with me where I remember he gave us a great insight into Unai Emery, which he proved to be spot on. Because I remember when you told us about Unai Emery and you said, yeah, he's a good coach, but I'm not sure if he's going to suit Arsenal. He was spot on with that. He's given us insights into Aubameyang. He's given us insights into Nicolas Pepe, all kinds of different French players, because he watches French football week in, week out, writes about it, and he's a total expert on it. So, Adam, great to have you on board, mate.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Robbie. How's it going? Not
too bad, man. The lockdown thing is, this is it at the moment. I mean, I'm doing all the work from out of here, but I'm kind of getting used to it now.
Yeah, same. Yeah, you sort of settle in a little bit, don't you?
Yeah. How you been getting on with it?
Yeah, fine. Yeah, doing lots of historical sort of writing at GFFN. So check that out if you get the chance. And yeah, it's just something we have to ride out, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, hopefully the football will be back soon.
100%. I mean, what's it looking like over there in France? I mean, because of course over here we got the lockdown and everything. I know in France it's a similar situation. Is there any sort of threat that the season may not come back and that could be voided?
Theoretically, yes, but I don't think that that's a realistic possibility. The way UEFA have been talking of late, I think they said yesterday perhaps that there was a possibility that they could discuss with nations that don't think they can finish their league. That might be a possibility, but I don't think there's any inclination from anyone in France to end the season as it stands, and definitely from the authorities. It's the same situation in pretty much every country. You know, if you don't finish a season, you leave yourself open to legal action from clubs who either would have been promoted or would have been relegated or could have been one of those two things, and it just leaves the whole situation in a mess. So I think probably that the inclination is just to get the season done whenever that is. But as this keeps going on, this terrible situation we're in, it keeps going on, and that comes less likely, I suppose. But for now, it seems like they want to get the season done at whatever happens.
Well, listen, I've got you on to talk about some of the players that Arsenal have been linked to. The first one I'm going to talk about is a guy, I mentioned him the other day. I don't know a lot about him. I have to be 100% honest. Just little clips I've seen, the regular YouTube clips, and little bits I've read about him. But it's Axel Disasi, if I pronounced that right.
Yeah, Axel Disasi. Yeah.
Well, got it right. Hey, yeah. Right. Axel Disasi of Reims. He's a centre back, and Arsenal have been getting linked pretty heavily to him. They're saying it'd be around about 18 million. I don't know. The prices are going to change, I think, because of this whole coronavirus crisis. But tell us a bit about Axel Disasi.
Well, he's a really interesting case. He's a player I really like. He's been at Reims for since 2016, summer 2016. He joined from Paris FC, who were in the second division at that time. They were just relegated after he moved. But he's only had a very short window of first team football. So he only really started in the Reims first team after Bjorn Engels left for Aston Villa last summer. So he's only really had, at 22, 2/3 of a season as sort of first choice in top level football. But given that sort of very short window of a small sample size, if you like, he's been really impressive this season. Reims are a team who like to defend, who are set up to defend, and they have the best defence in Ligue 1. They've only conceded 21 goals in 28 games, I think, even better than PSG. And their manager, David Guillon, is an extremely good young coach. He sort of was brought up at Reims through the youth team and the younger categories, and brought a lot of those players through. And that Disasi is one of those. He joined as a teenager, and he sort of brought him through this season. He actually was in the squad last year, but didn't play it really at all. When Engels was there, and they sort of brought him in through this season, and he's been absolutely fantastic.
And what's his strengths?
So he's an interesting type of player because he reads the game really well. He's a very sort of assured defender, but he still has a little bit of an issue with sort of a bit of lapses in concentration. But his sort of covering and his reading of the game is so good that he makes up for those lapses quite nicely. He's very sort of decisive defender when he gets the chance. His tackling's good, very broad defender, powerful defender. You know, he can handle a striker, so that suits the Premier League really nicely. And he's decent on the ball as well. The only thing with his sort of skill set compared to what perhaps Arsenal fans are looking for is that Reims, because they're a defensive team, sit very deep. So one of his strengths is heading the ball. When him and the other centre back Younes Abdelhamid, who I imagine we'll talk quite a lot about in this chat, they tend to sit in a penalty area, and they're very dominant in the air, and he's very dominant in the air as part of that partnership. But with Arsenal or potentially Arsenal, potentially another Premier League team, I've seen him link with others too. He would obviously be playing a higher line, and he would be challenged over his shoulder and in behind quite a lot, which is something that he isn't used to at Reims. And because it's such a small sort of sample size of first team football, there's no real evidence to say that that's something he would be comfortable with. So a very good defender, a very physical defender, reads the game nicely, but there's still some sort of question marks there.
Yeah, and lots of attributes there that I think that would suit Arsenal. I mean, being good in the air in the Premier League, it's a very handy thing because you're going to get a lot of aerial stuff in the Premier League. So would you say he would suit Arsenal? Would he be a good signing for Arsenal if we did sign him?
I think it's an intelligent sort of. He's sort of been done well to identify him, I think, because it's still very early in his career. But there's a big caveat to this discussion whether Arsenal should sign him or not. It's that he's had, in Jamie Carragher's words, a big brother alongside him in Younes Abdelhamid, who's a 31-year-old, I think, Moroccan defender who's very experienced in French football and has been the best defender in Ligue 1 this and last season. And so he's had that sort of stabilising influence alongside him. So he's really comes as almost part as a double act. So when you take him out of that partnership, you're very unsure as to how he would react and, move into Arsenal. And does he have that sort of bigger brother influence alongside him? Looking at the Arsenal at the moment, I guess that's David Luiz. But whether David Luiz is consistent enough, and I don't know how Arsenal fans feel about him in general, but for me, watching at PSG, he was, the classic David Luiz, and Thiago Silva sort of looked round and he disappeared off up the pitch. So which he's good at, but I don't know that that's something that you associate with like a strong defensive partnership, especially when the person alongside you is so inexperienced. So I think that the William Saliba situation is really interesting because
I was going to go on to ask you about that actually. Got to find out how he's been getting on this season at Saint Etienne. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of parallels there because I think the way that Arsenal acted and signed Saliba, because he's a very talented player, I would say, a more talented player than Disasi, that they loaned him back to Saint Etienne for another season. And in theory, that's a really good idea because he's a young player. That Arsenal have, I know that the centre back options are perhaps, people are not all too hot on them, but even so, there are people that can fill in, and maybe Saliba develops another year and moves back to Arsenal and a better player. And I would say that although Disasi's older, he's 22 compared to Saliba as a teenager, his lack of experience suggests that that's probably another good way to go here. Maybe Saliba joins this summer or whenever this transfer window is, and he develops, and the two can pair up a little bit later down the line. But so for Arsenal, I think that it's a really interesting idea, but whether he would settle into that team is a big question. So I like him a lot, but it might be too soon.
Saliba, how's he got on this season?
He's had a weird season, to be honest. He has had a lot of injuries, which is obviously not what Arsenal fans want to hear. He had a particularly long injury at the start of the season. Yeah, I thought that might be your reaction. And he was out for quite a long time, and he played in pre-season. I think got injury in pre-season actually, and was out for quite some time. But when he came back, he's looked really good. I think the game against Lyon, Saint Etienne and Lyon are huge rivals, and he played really well then. And he's had some really, really good performances, and they look so much better defensively with him in the side. The only thing is that Saint Etienne have had a terrible season, and considering they're a Europa League regular, really, they're on the verge of relegation. They won't get relegated, but they're fighting against relegation. So he's got a lot to do, and he's sort of been joined in a perhaps a similar way to Disasi might team up with him later on if that hypothetical situation happens to Arsenal. There's another very, very good young centre back called Wesley Fofana who's come through at Saint Etienne, and they're sort of playing alongside each other in defence. And they've probably been Saint Etienne's best two players this season, apart from Dennis Bouanga, who's a striker who's carried them in attack. So he's been good, but I think that it hasn't gone quite how Arsenal would have hoped, given his lack of football at the start of the year. But he's definitely still a talent we remember, and he is progressing. And
do you think he will suit Arsenal when he does eventually arrive?
Yeah, I think he's an upgrade, if you like, on Disasi. I think he's far calmer, he's far more consistent. He's better technically as well. And it's obviously a more attacking side, so he's used to being a little bit more isolated. Whereas Disasi, as I said, Rons aren't. They're a very good team, but they don't attack too much. So he's probably better suited to Arsenal and arguably a better talent. And got more to develop as well. These days you see these well-rounded sort of teenagers, and they come out of nowhere. We might discuss a few later on, but Saliba's sort of one of those, and Disasi is a little bit older, and perhaps Saliba's got that time to catch up, if you like, that time to develop that Disasi's already used up in his career, if you like. So yeah, I think he'd be great, but again, he needs support. Saliba would in the same sort of thing.
Yeah, well, another guy that's been mentioned a lot. Not sure if Arsenal will be able to get him. He's been mentioned a lot. Lots of people come on to the show in the comments, and they're always saying, "Why don't we go for this guy, Odsonne Edouard?" I don't know if I pronounced that right. He's a midfielder, plays for Lyon, 21, really talented. Everyone's talking about him. What can you tell us about him?
He's a great player. He's probably Lyon are an extremely good club for developing young players, and you've seen the players that have come through there of late. Like now Fekir, Corentin, Tolisso, and Lacazette. They've Alexandre Lacazette, I should say, and that's his brother. And Aouar's the latest, and arguably the most gifted. He reminds me a lot of Andres Iniesta, the way he sort of glides around midfield and he sort of drifts past people. Extremely graceful player, very, very good technically, creates, can score goals. Although his goal record perhaps could use some work, but he's scored some brilliant goals for Lyon. Gets assists and it potentially is a creative fulcrum for a very big club. So if Arsenal can get hold of him, that would be an extremely good signing. He's a player I think is probably the best sort of talent, sort of pound for pound talent in France right now, and he's brilliant. Basically, he's brilliant to watch. He's just so good on the ball, so creative. He'd be a great sign.
Okay, the other one's Gabriel at Lille. Now we were told that Arsenal were on the verge of signing him actually in January, and something seemed to go wrong with that. But he again's been linked centre back again at Lille. What can you tell us about him, Gabriel?
Yeah, I think it's a very similar situation to Axel Disasi in that he's had a rather unusual sort of path to prominence. He came from Brazil, from Aouar, who were sort of, I think at the time were in the Brazilian top flight, but not a particularly big club, to Lille a while ago and didn't play at all. They sent him on a couple of loans. He was at Troyes, who were in Ligue 1, but they bounced between Ligue 1 and Ligue 2. And he didn't play there at all. And I was sort of covering Troyes quite extensively that season. They weren't great. They got relegated. But I was expecting him to be one of their better players, one of the better defenders, given his sort of, he was a prospect from Brazil and Lille had scouted him there. He didn't play and went back to Lille and then back out on loan to Dynamo Zagreb and didn't play there either. And he was actually playing for their B team before he sort of returned to Lille. A new manager, Christophe Gautier, was there at that point, or sort of been, sort of settled in by that point. And he only really started getting into the first team at the end of last season when Adamus Sumoro, who was a highly rated defender, got suspended and then injured, and he took his place and performed really, really well. So he's very similar to Disasi in that he hasn't had that extensive first team football that so many young players have in this sort of league. Maybe not in the Premier League, but in France, young players are given a chance very early. I think he's 22 as well, Gabriel, and this is really his first season. So I think he's probably better on the ball than Disasi. His passing's very good. He also reads the game well. He's a modern centre back, basically. He reminds me of Rio Ferdinand. Players of sort of that sort of caliber, maybe not as good, of course, but the way he sort of covers and passes and plays a simple pass and can pick balls is really nice. So another interesting option, but I think he's playing alongside Jose Font, who's perhaps not a Premier League standard defender anymore, but a very experienced player. Yeah. And in France, again, he doesn't have to worry about balls over his shoulder. They can sit a little bit deeper, and Font's actually been really good for Lille in the last couple of seasons. Yeah. He's nurtured Gabriel. So I think whether that would translate is interesting.
Yeah. The other one, the next guy, he doesn't actually play in France. He plays in Scotland, but he is French. And that's Odsonne Edouard. Now, he's a striker, as you know. Again, another 22-year-old. He's been heavily linked with Arsenal as a possible replacement if Aubameyang was to go.
Yeah.
What do you know about Edouard?
Well, a little bit. He was in France. He started at PSG. And was very much on the fringes of the squad. He was a youth team player. Really played a bit in pre-season. Always, to me, looked out of his depth at PSG. Unsurprisingly, as an 18-year-old, and then moved to Toulouse. And he was sort of hoped that he would develop at Toulouse. And he'll return to PSG and maybe they could, they've done this with a few players and loaned them out successive seasons. And at Toulouse, he had a very rocky spell. He wasn't really in the team. Toulouse are a team that has struggled quite a lot recently. They're bottom of the league. They're going to get relegated this season. And he was sort of in and out the side. I think I remember him only really impacting 1 or 2 games. And he had an unfortunate incident. We actually ended up sort of effectively being sacked by the club. And him and Mathieu Cafaro, who's at Reims now as well, were involved in an incident where they were sort of end up being questioned by police with an incident with Odsonne Edouard's car. They had an air rifle, I think, and they were being in trouble like with that. So him and Cafaro got sacked, and he went back to sort of PSG with his tail between his legs, and ended up at Celtic. And I was chatting to some guys in Glasgow radio a few months ago about him, and we've been keeping tabs on him in France, obviously, because he was very good for under-21s over the course of the summer, and his finishing has become absolutely devastating. And he's such a powerful striker. The way he can sort of bully defenders, he's quick and he's skillful, and like I said, his finishing has become really sort of exacting. So in the last few years, he's really developed, and I think he's not Aubameyang standard, but he's definitely a type of player that is ready to move on. We saw with Moussa Dembele at Celtic, did really well there, and has been brilliant at Lyon of late. So I think he's an interesting player and very talented, and has really developed in Scotland. But obviously, there's a big jump from Celtic to Arsenal these days.
Very big jump. I mean, who else can you tell us about in France if we're scouting for players right now for Arsenal? I mean, in particular, those positions, defence. We could do with a defensive midfielder, or we could do with a creative midfielder as well. You already told us about Aouar. And a striker. I mean, defensive midfielder wise, I like that kid. I don't know if he's sort of I wouldn't say he's a defensive midfielder. He's more box to box. But that kid, I've forgotten his name now, who plays for Rennes.
Oh, Eduardo Camavinga,
the 16-year-old one.
Yeah, Camavinga. Yeah,
he's unreal. He is.
Yeah, he's a fantastic prospect. I mean, there was even talk of Real Madrid bidding 100 million for him at one point.
Well, I remember when I saw him play, I was like, he ain't 16, surely. But he reminds me a lot of Pogba.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. And the way he sort of bosses the midfield despite his sort of youth, and his passing is great. He's got a fantastic win at Lyon actually earlier in the season where he sort of beat a couple of guys close to the penalty area and smashed it past Anthony Lopez. Great goal. And he's a fantastic prospect. And I think the thing that really stands out about him is that game against PSG, which I think Renat ended up winning. He dominated the game against PSG, and was and there's a brilliant.
I remember watching that game.
Yeah, and that kind of shows that even at that young age, that he's got so much sort of maturity and he's got so much presence that he'd be great. I think if we're talking defensive midfielders, I saw that Arsenal were linked with Le Havre defensive midfielder Pape, who's been really, really good this year. He's 21, maybe even available on a free in the summer as his contract's running down. He's very much like he's been like Paul Pogba as well, very sort of dominating. He likes to order his teammates about, and he's been captain of Le Havre in the second division this season. And he's another one to look out for. He could be a really interesting prospect.
So a good array of players there. On the Aubameyang thing, obviously he's getting linked with a move away. He started off playing in France. He's a quality player we can't afford to lose. I mean, what's the talk? PSG ain't in for him, are they? Please.
Not that I've seen, to be honest. I think with the Aubameyang situation, I don't know what Arsenal fans think, but there's for a club that pride themselves on youth development and building a squad and building bringing young players and developing them and building a team. I never really understood the thought process behind signing Aubameyang and Lacazette, because surely they play in the same position, unless Arsenal are sort of thinking to play 3-5-2 or playing 4-4-2 with 2 strikers. Okay, Aubameyang can play wide, but it's not his best position, and Lacazette definitely can't play wide. So you get this situation where you kind of feel like one of them may have to leave just for balance's sake. So as far as I'm aware, Aubameyang's not on PSG's radar. Well, he's probably on their radar. Everybody's on their radar, but he's not someone that they're looking to sign just yet, or it's not really in the news if that's true. So I don't. This summer will be interesting, but I still don't think that from my personal point of view, the way I read it is that it would be a surprise if he left.
Yeah. The thing is about it, right, is that obviously we're going to be struggling over here. We've already heard about even Arsenal having to take players taking pay cuts and stuff like that. And they're a huge club. Clubs over there in France that maybe not as big, are they going to be, you think there's going to be a lot of bargains to be had for the clubs in the Premier League once the sort of transfer windows get underway?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think with French clubs, they're always predisposed to sell. Marseille actually signed a director who used to be at West Ham solely for the purpose of selling players to the Premier League. Because they are in financial difficulties. So this is a league that looks to sell to the Premier League, and it's basically the model that a lot of them have adopted. So I think that there will be opportunity to sign a lot of players over the summer, at good prices, maybe not bargain prices, but very good prices. And they're in trouble. Yes, I've heard stories of clubs being sort of in trouble with finances, but whether they would cut prices on some big players would be I'd be surprised, to be honest, but they may need to.
All right, well, listen, Adam, as usual, great insight. Really, really appreciate it. Tell everybody again where they can check you out.
Yeah, check us out on Twitter at GFFN and also at getfootballnewsfrance.com. We also actually released a European football magazine recently, if I give that a quick plug. Before the football slot, edited by me. Some great writers from across all of the Get Football outlets there's club columns on all the big clubs. So there's 10 player profiles on exciting young talent. So check that out if you get a chance. It's pinned to all our Twitter accounts. So have a look at that and check out GFFN on Twitter.
All right. Thank you very much, Adam. Really, really appreciate you for coming on. That's Adam White there. Hope you guys really enjoyed that special today, featuring, talking about some of those players we've been heavily linked to, and hopefully gave you a better insight on that. Thanks, and we'll be back tomorrow morning. The coronavirus has not just affected the world of football, but has affected everybody. But you know what? We can defeat it. If you're displaying any of the symptoms, always make sure that you self-isolate. I know it's a terrible time, but we will defeat the coronavirus. We will be back.